Okay, thanks to some of you for swimming in this morning. Let's dive right in, no pun intended. You're working your way through your second milestone. As I mentioned last time, some of you may be waking up to the reality of what you promised last week. That's okay. If you've got a change in plan, just let us know, a few sentences. And remember, you're trying to make things easy on the TA by showing her in a few images or a short video proof that you've implemented whatever your milestone is for this week. Any questions about final project? Going once? Okay. All right. So back to the elephant in the room in regards to evolutionary robotics, the biggest unsolved problem. We have a lot of compute out there at the moment. It's relatively easy, not easy, but relatively easy to create complex simulated worlds, evolve robots in them, and then the tricky part is how do we bring them into reality? When we embody anything you evolved in simulation, from that robot's perspective, it's going to experience a different environment. No matter how accurate your simulation is, it's always going to be different from reality. So our evolved robots are going to have to enter the same river twice. They're going to have to try and retain somehow evolved behavior from simulation to reality. There is an increasing amount of effort, academic effort going into this problem, and now with real-world robotics and autonomous vehicles and drones, there's significant industrial, government, regulatory effort going into this problem as well. You can prove that an autonomous vehicle is safe in simulation or a model. How do you go about proving that it's going to be safe on our streets here in the real world? An unsolved problem at the moment. So last time in lecture 14, we looked at the first attempt going back to the 90s to try and solve this. The idea here was to make sure that every time a robot was evaluated in simulation, it never experienced the same simulation twice. There was always a little bit of variability or noise sprinkled across various aspects of the simulation. We'll jump back to lecture 15 in a moment, dedicated to the GOLEM project reported in the year 2000 when physics engines just started to appear, and the GOLEM project also incorporated a second new technology at that time, which was 3D printers. So the GOLEM project was simultaneously an attempt to cross the reality gap, and we'll go back to that in a moment, but it was also an attempt to try and automate the manufacture of robots. We've been talking so far in this course about automated design of robots using evolutionary algorithms mostly. Can you couple a physics engine and an evolutionary algorithm to a 3D printer or some new type of fabrication device and automate design and manufacture? If you can, you might be able to scale up the design and construction and deployment of very large numbers of autonomous machines. We're not there yet, but this is sort of a challenge that many roboticists and companies are working on at present. Okay, we'll probably finish up the lecture 15 today on the GOLEM project and move on to lecture 16, the Resilient Machines project. Okay, back to the GOLEM project. We saw last time that in the GOLEM project, they're going to evolve not just synaptic weights for control policies in a fixed robot. They're going to expand their evolutionary algorithm to evolve both the body and brain of their robots. And we're going to see more and more of that towards the end of this semester. Step one, evolve a robot to locomote in simulation like we've seen before by evolving body and brains. Step two, manufacture as much of the physical robot as can be manufactured by a 3D printer. And then whatever the 3D printer can't manufacture, snap that in manually. So partly automated manufacture of evolved robots. Okay, we walked through the genotype last time. In the GOLEM project, there's a relatively complicated genotype to phenotype mapping. We started to talk about the evolutionary algorithm last time. Instead of starting with random genomes, they start with null genomes. They have 200 null robot lists. Every single one of those 200 robots has no vertices, no bars, no motors, no neurons, no actuators, and so on. We ended last time by talking about the evaluation period. How long does one simulation run? They have a CPG in one of these neurons. Every robot has its own CPG that emits a sinusoidal pattern that can be used by the motors, and that CPG is allowed to oscillate 12 times. Yeah? Okay. All right. So fitness of all the 200 empty genomes is by definition 0. An empty G leads to an MTP, which doesn't go anywhere, which means it gets a fitness of 0. Some of those survive by chance, some of those are killed off, and then the ones that survive produce randomly modified copies of themselves. Question?
What's the point of having, like, say like half of them get killed off? What's the point of having just half of them get killed off before like any sort of like evolution takes place?
Why make 200 empty Gs and then randomly kill off half of them? Seems like overkill. Why didn't they start with random genomes as we've seen before? Seems like kind of an odd experimental choice. As we're going to see in a moment, they start with these 200 random ones, and again, randomly, 200 empty ones, randomly kill off half of them, and they're going to start to produce offspring that aren't null anymore. Mutations are going to start to add in, slowly but surely, a neuron, a vertex here, a bar there, a neuron there, a motor there. Why start this evolving population like that? Why not just create random robots? It's not really obvious. Remember that at the end of this evolutionary process, we're talking about the start, when we get to the end, they're going to take the robot with the greatest fitness and they're going to build it. They're going to send it to a 3D printer that's going to build it. These 3D printers weren't very powerful back 25 years ago. They wanted to start simple. A robot that had 200 vertices and bars, I doubt a printer today would be able to print out such a mechanism. Tricky. So by starting with just null, basically maximally simple robots, and then mutations start to gradually add physical or neural material to the robot, they're going to get robots that are made up of 2, 3 vertices, 2, 3 bars, 4 vertices, 4 bars. They're trying to keep things simple by starting with the simplest robots you can imagine. Okay, all right, so we've got 100 surviving empty Gs. Each one of them is going to produce an offspring. And as it does, we're going to make randomly modified changes to this null genotype through a mutation. There's no recombination in the GOLEM project. In the GOLEM project, they had 9 different kinds of mutation operators. So every time they copied a null G, they rolled a 9-sided die, and whatever number came up, that's the mutation that was applied to the copied G. Okay, let's very quickly read through them. Change the length of a bar. So if this 9-sided die comes up with a 1, the mutation operator would randomly choose a bar and change the length of it by a little bit, or randomly grab a synapse, change the weight of that synapse. If the die rolled a 3 or a 4, they would either add or remove a dangling bar from a randomly chose vertex. If the die came up 5 or 6, randomly add or remove a neuron to the brain of the robot. Mutation 7, randomly choose a vertex, split that vertex into 2 vertices, and connect those 2 vertices together with a small bar. If the die comes up 8, split the bar into 2 and add a vertex there. So now we've got 3 vertices and 2 bars. A 10-sided die. If a number 9 or 10 comes up, attach or detach a neuron to a bar. So in these 8 mutation operators, you can see how they cause small random changes to the body or small changes to the disconnected brain. That's why they've drawn it over here. In the brain here, we've got 5 neurons and a bunch of synapses that connect them. Mutations can also create or remove a synapse between a neuron and a bar. Remember that the bars themselves are simulated as a piston, and there is a spring inside the piston, and if a synapse comes in and attaches to it, that synapse is attaching to a motor that elongates the spring or shortens the spring. So 9 and 10 creates or destroys motor neurons by sending a synapse from the brain to connect to a motor. Question?
Those percentages don't come close to adding up to 100, so is there like a null mutation as well to just like not mutate?
That's a great question. I don't know how many times I've taught this lecture, nobody's ever brought that up before. It's not even close to 100%, is it? I have absolutely no idea. You can go back and have a look at the paper. The paper's got a pretty detailed method section. Actually, can someone do me a favor and actually do that and email me? Okay, good question. I have absolutely no idea. It could be that, it could actually be, my guess would be nothing changes. It produces an identical copy of itself. I don't know if I've mentioned that before. In many evolutionary algorithms, they allow offspring to be produced that are identical to the parent. So you just have more of a particular type of individual. That would be my guess, although I'm not 100% sure. Okay, so as you've also pointed out, these percentages are the probability of these mutation operators being applied. So it's not an equally weighted 10-sided die. Some sides come up more often than others. Okay, let's exercise our intuition for these mutation operators using this little cartoon down here from the original paper. To the left of this first black arrow, there's nothing. That's the empty P. So over here, you might not think so, but there is a robot. It's a robot that has 0 vertices, 0 bars, 0 motors, 0 neurons, 0 synapses. What is the mutation that was applied when this null parent produced this offspring? This offspring robot, as you can see, is nothing more than one short bar. Which of the 10 mutation operators turned this parent into this child? Add a dangling bar. So this parent got to reproduce. They rolled a 9-sided die. It came up 3. 3 says add a small dangling bar. There you go. This child, let's assume, survived and was able to produce an offspring into the 3rd generation. It produced this offspring. What mutation occurred as this parent was spawning this child? Change the length of a bar. Exactly. Okay, you see how this game goes. What about this one? There were a couple of mutations that occurred when this parent produced this offspring. 9, attach a neuron to the bar. So there's a neuron here. I think it's actually 5. Add an unconnected neuron. So 5, and then the bar got longer, change the length of the bar. So there was more than one mutation that was applied when this parent produced an offspring. How about this parent and this offspring? The bar is getting longer again, so this mutation occurred, changed the length of the bar. The wording here is a little ambiguous. Add an unconnected neuron. The unconnected means unconnected to the body. When you add an unconnected neuron into the neural network, for a robot in this project, that all the other existing neurons send out synapses and connect to it. It's left unspecified here, so it's a little confusing. But as the brain gets bigger, as mutations add neurons, synapses grow out from existing neurons and attach to the new ones as well. So you can see over this family lineage that includes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 generations, we're getting gradual, through random change, we're generally getting a more complex robot. You can see in this very last generation here, this is number 9, attach a neuron chosen at random, in this case, this neuron, and attach it to a random bar. They chose this bar at random, and you can see a little cross-section here. This bar is cut in half. So this particular bar now is going to increase and decrease over the simulation. These ones are not even going to move. There's a body and there's a brain, but there's no connection from the brain to the body. So we've got a little bit of complication in physical structure, neural material, and finally the appearance of some behavior 7 generations in. Everybody get the general idea? Okay. Okay. Again, I apologize for the low resolution graphics here. Hopefully you can see. What we're looking at here is partway through the evolutionary process. They're doing a cross-section through the population of 200 robots partway through evolution. And you can see that there's a little bit of diversity in the kinds of bodies that are arising. So we've got a population of different robots, but you can also see there's a little bit of common structure here. There's certain ways in which these body plans are able to move about. This is another cross-section, but now this is a vertical cross-section. So we're now looking at the best robot in the population up here in the top left, the best robot in the population at generation 4, and that robot had a fitness of 0. So fitness is displacement. So if fitness is 0, it means that this particular robot didn't move at all. If we go down here, this is the best robot in the population at generation 13, also not moving. Generation 26, also not moving. Finally, by generation 27 here, the most fit robot in the population at that time moves 0.19 length units. You'll notice that all of the bodies of these robots look very similar. They probably belong to the same lineage. Okay, best robot at generation 36, 50, 60, 62, 76, 105. At the 190th generation, they have this robot here, which has a fitness of 0. That doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, I misspoke before. They're showing at each evolutionary moment not the best robot in the population, but a randomly chosen robot. So you'll notice there are a lot of fitness 0 here. So some robots in the population are not moving and some are. They're trying to show you what diversity looks like at a given moment in evolutionary time and what bodies tend to look like as evolution proceeds. Okay, I'm going to turn the lights back on. Okay. This is another figure from the paper. This is an interesting visualization that we haven't seen before, but you probably have seen it if you've taken a biology class before. This is a dendrogram, a tree figure or a tree picture. It's a nice way of visualizing biological evolution, or in this case, visualizing artificial evolution. Let's dive right in and have a look at panel A here. Panel A is representing all 200 robots in the population over all evolutionary time down here. So how is this drawn? Every node in this dendrogram represents an individual, and every link represents a parent-child relationship. So very difficult to see, but in the top row here, this is generation 0. You'll have to trust me. There's 200 very, very, very small dots representing the 200 original null genotypes, the null robots. You'll notice that one of these robots, this one here, produced one child down here, and that child produced several grandchildren, and those grandchildren produced even more great-grandchildren, and we can see a growing fraction of the population that descended from this one common ancestor. A whole bunch of the dots in here died out. They didn't produce any offspring. They had lower fitness and were killed off. So you can see phylogenetic trees or phylogenetic relationships, ancestry, the rise and fall of different families or different types of robots within this entire population of 200. Okay, last detail of most dendrograms is that horizontal distance in a dendrogram represents the similarity of ancestry. So, for example, if we go a little bit further down here, the dots that are clustered in here, these are brothers and sisters and first cousins. This dot and this dot over here, we have to go further back to find a common ancestor. So these are third, fourth cousins, 11, 12th cousins, and so on. Yeah? Okay. In panel A here, when they started with a random population of 200 Gs, by the end, they got quite a bit of diversity, and we can tell that there's diversity in the population by the wide horizontal spread in the 200 dots that land down here. Some of them are clustered together. There's a bunch of dots here. These ones are quite similar, but they probably look and act pretty differently from their fourth and fifth and sixth cousins, because as we trace the ancestry back from these distant cousins, we have to go further and further back in evolutionary history to find their common ancestor. And then if we walk back down from that common ancestor to the fifth and sixth cousins, there were probably a lot of mutations along the way that caused them to become more and more different in terms of physical form and behavioral function. Yeah? All of us in this room, we're all cousins in some way, but you might have to go quite a ways back to find our common ancestor. Okay. In the GOLEM project, they ran the evolutionary algorithm several times. So they rewound the evolutionary tape, started again with 200 empty genomes, and ran the evolutionary algorithm forward again. And in this case, just by chance, through the particular trial and error of this project, they got very little diversity. There was one robot way back here that seemed to do a pretty good job, and it produced a child, grandchild, great-grandchild. That's only 4 hops, so the great-grandchild is probably kind of similar to the original ancestor, and it produced a whole bunch of individuals that weren't that far away. So 5th and 6th and 7th cousins died off. First, second cousins survived. They produced siblings, and so on and so forth. So things stayed pretty clustered around whatever this robot body plan was. It's obviously not shown in this figure, but you can see the visual disparity, the very different look between these two evolutionary runs shows that even with the same evolutionary algorithm, you can get pretty different results. Sometimes you end up with a big diversity of solutions, and sometimes all of the solutions within your population cluster around more or less the same solution. They rewound the evolutionary tape again and ran it forward a third time. And in this case, they got 2 different clades, or 2 different groupings within the population that were similar, but individuals from different clades very different. So if we grab an individual from this clade and an individual from this clade, we have to go back all the way to the first generation to find a common ancestor. Panel D here, this was evidence that extinction can occur in this run, in this evolutionary algorithm. So early in this evolutionary history here, there were 197 individuals in the population that were all related, and then there were 3 individuals over here that were completely different. These 3 did not share a common ancestor with these 197. There were 197 of these and only 3 of these, because presumably these were doing better than these, getting higher fitness. Somehow these managed to survive for a while. So we've got our big lumbering dinosaurs over here covering the surface of the earth, and there's a couple of small furry mammals running around in the undergrowth over here, managing to survive. And then one or a couple of these little furry mammals started to produce some offspring that started to move quicker and quicker and quicker, and started to evolve to move faster and faster than these lumbering robots over here, and eventually drove this majority clade to extinction and took over the population. Pretty simple evolutionary algorithm, but you get some interesting evolutionary dynamics. The parallel hill climber won't do this because everybody stays in their own track, right? Everyone produces one and only one individual. If you wanted to give this a try, you can make changes to your parallel hill climber or go back to the genetic algorithm where survivors can produce 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 children. And then you can plot, if you record the fitness and you record the ancestry of all the individuals in your evolving population, you can reconstruct a dendrogram and see whether you also get some interesting evolutionary dynamics in your evolutionary algorithm. Okay. Okay. Let's have a look at some of the evolved solutions. Okay. You'll have to forgive the physics engines of this time. These were the very first physics engines. You can see they're not too accurate. There's a lot of interpenetration here. Collision detection and resolution is a little rough. What do you think? Is this going to transfer from simulation to reality? I don't know about you. I'm not very confident. We'll see. We'll see in a moment. Okay. This was one individual. This was one of its cousins existing in the population. Looks similar, acts similar, not exactly the same. We should have a betting pool going. Going to transfer? Yes, no, maybe. I see a lot of shaking of heads. Okay. Here's the crab. Yes, no, maybe. Why not? All right, let's keep going. Another cousin of that one. Okay, here we go. These are the 3 most fit individuals from different evolutionary runs. As we just saw, they ran the evolutionary algorithm multiple times. They got different kinds of patterns. In one run, they got the arrow, as you see here. They spent some considerable effort 3D printing this robot. All of the white components of these robots that you see, these are the parts that were built by the 3D printer. Everything that is not white was snapped in manually by the investigators. The white that you see here, this is thermoplastic. This is plastic that has a very high melting point. So most 3D printers at the time, and still today, the nozzle or the cartridge in the 3D printer warms the thermoplastic and basically liquefies it and extrudes or drips liquid plastic, which very quickly solidifies when it hits the growing structure and becomes, in this case, sort of the skeleton of the robot. I've sort of given you the punchline here already. The simulated arrow in the physics engine traveled 60 centimeters. When it was built, it only traveled 1/3 of the distance. So made it 1/3 of the way across the gap. The pusher over here, and I'll play these videos for you in a moment, this one did even worse. Traveled 85 centimeters in simulation and only 23 centimeters in reality. The tetrahedron down here didn't do very well in terms of simulation. It only achieved 38 compared to 85 for the pusher or 60 for the arrow. The tetrahedron, however, when they transferred it to reality, the match was really, really, really good. Off by a millimeter. Not bad. Just through visual inspection, what's so good about the tetrahedron? Stable, okay. Other observations?
I'm not too sure, but it kind of seems more simple than the other two, I guess.
Simpler,
Maybe
absolutely.
The simulation had like an easier time.
Absolutely, right? General rule of thumb in engineering, the simpler the machine, the less that can go wrong. That includes things that can go wrong in transferal from simulation to reality.
Maybe there's like less friction. Like there's not so much things on the ground while this one is less than.
Absolutely. So it definitely has to do with friction. The strong hint is you can see that they ran the physical robots on carpet, so high friction. Why does the tetrahedron achieve less friction, do you think?
I mean, we didn't see how it's gonna move, but I feel like it's probably gonna lift something and then put it down. And so nothing is like dragging out on the floor, while the other one, there's always, like its entire body is always gonna be on the floor. So
Great.
there's always gonna be friction.
Great observation. So you can tell just by looking at the body plans of these two, however they move, the major component of the oscillation or the movement is going to be horizontal, which is going to incur a friction cost, right? Remember when we talked about locomotion, reptiles tend to move on the ground, good for stability, but you pay a big energetic cost and also a loss in displacement. Okay. Let's see if I can play some of these. Here's the simulated arrow. And as pointed out, most of its motion is horizontal. And you can see the friction modeling here, which isn't great, but it's good in the sense that it's slowing the robot down. That's the simulated arrow. Still high friction. It's still doing more or less the same thing. It's exhibiting the same motion, moving in the correct direction, just slower. So, okay. Not great, but okay. Okay, the pusher. It's pushing a little bit more vertically. There's more of a vertical component to the force acting on the ground, but clearly it's dragging a lot of its parts. You'll notice that the evolutionary algorithm has evolved to exploit the not great collision detection and resolution. Yeah? Okay. Let's see how this one does in reality. Still a pretty simple machine. It's got kind of the right idea. Okay, and then finally, the tetrahedron. Vertical component of pushing. It's still dragging its components. What you can't see from this physics engine is that the total weight of the robot is being lessened. So it's still dragging the parts, but the parts are lighter when they're dragging. They added in a simulation here so you can actually see the neural network brain at the same time. You can see the neurons firing, the synapses. You can see that white line that's sending a value to the motor neuron inside one of the actuated bars. They cheated a little bit. You can see the video sped up a little bit. Okay. Not the most complicated robots, but a demonstration, number one, that it is possible to cross the sim to real gap. And it is also possible, thanks to 3D printers, to automate the manufacture of these robots a bit. So now that we've talked quite a bit about the GOLEM project, how does the GOLEM project try and go about solving the sim to real problem? It does it by assuming that, by creating diversity. Lots of different robots with different form and function, and hoping that at least one of them makes it across the gap. The radical envelope of noise hypothesis, the intuition is don't allow evolution to clamp on to inaccuracies in the simulation. The intuition behind the GOLEM project, Let's just make a whole bunch of them, and let's automate the manufacture of them so we can pump out a large number of them. And if any of them don't manage to cross the gap, throw them away, keep the ones that do. Okay. Okay, so again, I mentioned a little bit about 3D printers. This is the very early history of 3D printers. You can see here there's a little bit of a nozzle here. This nozzle goes back and forth over a horizontal plate and lays down some of this thermoplastic, which very quickly solidifies. You can see the robot being printed here that's made up of these hollow cylinders. You can see that depending on the geometry, the 3D printer needs to print a little bit of thin supporting thermoplastic structure. What they would typically do is print out one of these robots in the afternoon, and then you put it in a very lightly saline solution bath overnight, and that kind of dissolves away the thinner bits of thermoplastic and basically gets rid of the scaffolding, and you're left with the robot. You'll notice that they came up with a relatively complicated and elegant geometric solution to create a hinge joint. They're printing, or the 3D printer doesn't print separate parts and then somebody puts them together. It prints the robot as one entire piece. The nice thing about 3D printers is they can print relatively complicated and high resolution 3D geometry. So if you get the geometry right, you can print out things like 1 degree of freedom hinge joints. Here's the little electronics that they're connecting to the robot, and the robot's got to kind of have to, it kind of drags its brain along with it. Okay. Okay. At the time, people were thinking about what would be the use of these 3D printers. The idea was perhaps you could create recyclable robots. Once the robot's done cleaning the leaves out of the eaves on your home, you throw it in your microwave, heat it up, melt all the thermoplastic, and send the thermoplastic back to the company, and it'll 3D print a robot for you. And maybe you can even create a fancy microwave that builds one for you. Okay. These investigators were not without a sense of humor. Okay. Okay. That was the GOLEM project. One of the things that came about as the GOLEM project was being conducted. So it was a project conducted at Cornell. I was there doing my postdoc when they were finishing up this project, was the difficulty of working with these big, clunky 3D printers. So the investigators that worked on the GOLEM project, they started a second project called Fab at Home, which was the idea that you could perhaps open source 3D printing. One of the things that led to the computer revolution in the 80s was the invention of personal computers. The idea that you could actually get people to buy a kit and put together their own computers, or maybe buy a very simple computer and use it at home. Nobody had any reason to think about why a computer would be useful for people at home. People figured it out. So the idea in the early 2000s of the Fab at Home project was, let's try and get a 3D printer into everybody's home. How many of you have a 3D printer at home? Okay, that vision hasn't quite come about yet. Maybe someday. Okay. Across the pond in the UK, there was another set of researchers working at the same time that were also thinking along same lines about how could you get people to build simple 3D printers at home. The RepRap group took this idea one step further. They had open source designs or a kit that you could buy, and if you put that kit together, you would build a 3D printer, and that 3D printer would print its own parts. So a 3D printer that prints doesn't necessarily make, you'd still have to do it by hand, but a 3D printer that makes a machine, that makes a machine, that makes a machine. We don't have time to play the video, but if you go Google RepRap, you can watch them carrying this out. There was another interesting idea at the time, which is maybe you could evolve not robots, but 3D printers. What might be the fitness function for an evolutionary algorithm that's going to evolve populations of 3D printers? What makes for a good 3D printer, a not so good 3D printer?
It's a factor of like volume and quality and speed.
Volume, quality, and speed. Okay, so evolved 3D printers that print stuff faster, print bigger stuff faster. Other ideas? Those would be good. Let's throw those into the fitness function.
Precision.
Precision. How? And as you can see, you sometimes need pretty good precision. How precise can you get it to print something out? If you're evolving 3D printers that print some or maybe most of their own parts, maybe you can include a term to your fitness function, which is the percentage of its own parts that it's capable of printing out. Kind of an interesting idea. Hasn't really materialized yet, but we'll see. Maybe someday. Okay, that concludes the GOLEM project. We're now going to move on to lecture 16 and the Resilient Machines project, which had yet a different angle of attack to solving the sim to real problem. Okay. To motivate the Resilient Machines project, let's go back to this slide, which we saw at the very beginning of the semester. Ultimately, we'd like to have robots that we can automatically design in a supercomputer, automatically manufacture them with 3D printers, have them go out into the world, but then the world is going to change around them. What do we do at that point? Do we go back to the drawing board and re-evolve robots in simulation, manufacture them, print them out again? Do we somehow try and evolve robots that can do on-site training? They can learn on the job. How do we deal with the fact that things are always changing? This problem is complicated by the fact that not only does the world around a robot change, the robot itself changes. So in the Resilient Machines project, the investigators attempted to cross the reality gap, and I'm going to show you how they did that in a moment. Here's a successful crossing of sim to real. I haven't shown you sim yet, but here's real. We've got a robot that's doing what we want, moving from left to right. What happens if not just the environment around the robot, but the robot itself changes? What happens if it suffers an injury? If it suffers an injury, like, for example, a grad student going in with a screwdriver and mechanically removing the lower part of the robot's leg. What worked before no longer works. So the robot is going to have to readapt somehow. The task is still the same, move from left to right along the table. So in the GOLEM project, they were tackling the sim to real problem, but they were also tackling the scalability problem. How do we pump out large numbers of robots? In the Resilient Machines project, the investigators were also trying to solve the sim to real problem, but they were also trying to solve another problem, which is, can we keep doing sim to real? Can the robot or can something or someone keep evolving simulations or control policies and keep sending them to the physical robot so that if something happens, it just keeps going. It just keeps pumping out controllers and adapting to the problem, to changes to the robot and its environment. Okay, we're going to dive down into the details and see how this works. Before we do, let's look at the rationale, what led up to the reasoning behind the Resilient Machines project. As we've seen many times in this class now, standard evolutionary robotics paradigm, evolve controllers for robots to automatically discover good behavior. Okay, there's several ways to do this. The first way that we saw back at the beginning of the class, before there were simulators, evolve hundreds or thousands of controllers directly on the physical machine. That has an obvious limitation. What is it?
The microcontrollers on your robot probably don't have the power to run some of these advanced algorithms.
Possibly. Maybe we can't do the evolution on the microcontroller. That's true. We could do that today. Why aren't we in this class? Why aren't I giving you a physical robot and telling you to go home and evaluate thousands of controllers on your robot?
Scalability.
Scalability how?
You can run a lot more simulations a lot quicker than if you have like a robot setup, because you can parallelize and you can also like run faster than what real time might be.
Absolutely, right? For most of you, hopefully your simulations are running faster than real time. Whatever your final project is, imagine trying to do it without a simulator. You had to just download controllers, thousands of them, onto your physical robot. So obvious limitations to this approach. So the obvious alternative, once physics engines appeared, is create a physical simulation of the robot, do all of the controller evolution in simulation, and then cross your fingers and hope for the best that things transfer from sim to real. What's the problem with the alternative? Again, why am I not giving you a physical robot and you all have to try and transfer your evolved controllers from simulation onto your physical robot? Mind the gap, right? How do you know that what you evolve in simulation is going to work in reality? Not only that, there's the reality gap problem, but you got to make the simulator itself. In this course, I gave you most of a physics engine. You had to build a bit of stuff on top. For the students who took this course for graduate credit and did the differentiable simulations, you built a differentiable simulation from scratch. It takes time and it's non-trivial. So is there a third approach? There is actually a third approach, which we haven't talked about in this course yet, which is design a hand-created controller. Take a physical machine and try and work out the rudiments of something that works. And then adapt that hand-designed controller on the robot. Use reinforcement learning or some of the ideas from machine learning to fine-tune the controller on the physical robot. Tricky to do because even handcrafting an approximate or clunky controller, very difficult, very non-intuitive to do. So all of the approaches to automatically designing behaviors for robots have flaws with them, shown in italics here. So the investigators in the Resilient Machines project came up with a different idea, and it goes as follows. Let's assume we already have a physical robot. So this is not the GOLEM project. We're not going to be evolving robot bodies. We have our quadruped robot that you just saw. We're going to let that robot just move around in its environment. No evolution, no simulation, just do stuff and generate a bunch of sensor motor data. When I push with this motor, I sense myself rotating to the left. When I push with this motor, I sense myself rotating to the right. Collect a whole bunch of that type of sensor motor data. And then use all that sensor motor data to evolve not a robot in a simulator, evolve the simulator itself. If simulators take so much time to create by hand, why don't we just evolve populations of simulators? We're going to evolve, as you're going to see in the Resilient Machines project, that's exactly what they did. They evolved those simulators. What is the fitness, do you think, of any given simulator? We've just collected a whole bunch of sensor motor data from the physical robot. Now we're going to set that data aside, start to evolve populations of simulators. What makes for a good or highly fit simulation compared to a bad or low fit simulation?
The closest to reality.
In this case, we're going to cross sim to real by starting by doing real to sim. Get a whole bunch of sensor motor data and then evolve simulators. And if they can predict or recapitulate, if they can get the simulated robot in the evolved simulator to generate the same sensor motor data that the physical robot experienced, by definition, that's an accurate simulator. Okay, so the heart of the Resilient Machines project, there's a lot of other moving parts to it, but this is the most important takeaway. We're going to evolve the simulators themselves. Okay. Once we have an accurate simulator, the physical robot is going to generate new experiences via curiosity. If we're going to try and evolve simulators based on sensor motor experience from the robot better do a lot of different things. If it doesn't, we might evolve an accurate simulator, but it's only going to simulate accurately a subset of all the experiences the robot can have. Okay, so the third and final part of this project, of the Resilient Machines project, is once we have an evolved simulator that was trained against experiences collected by the physical robot through curious motion, we're going to do what we always do. Now, take the evolved simulator, evolve controllers for the simulated robot in simulation, and then do sim to real at the end. Yeah? Okay, so there's 3 parts to this. It's got a bit of a clunky name, but in essence, what we're going to do is we're going to try and estimate the robot. We're going to estimate what it is and what it experiences. We're going to ask the physical robot to be curious and explore its own relationship with the world. And then finally, we're going to exploit those experiences to evolve a controller for the robot. So the investigators originally called this algorithm the estimation, exploration, exploitation algorithm. It's a horrible name. It's become known in retrospect as the Resilient Machines project, and we'll see why the resilient part is in there in a moment. We're going to walk through the Resilient Machines project in a moment. I've been mentioning the investigator several times. I'm the investigator. This was the project that I worked on as a postdoc at Cornell. So all of the inelegant aspects of the experiment, you know who to blame. Okay, here we go. Okay, here's our robot. Remember, we're going to start with real. So we've got this quadruped robot. We want it to walk forward. We want it to climb stairs. We want it to push the leaves out of the gutters on our home. Whatever it is we want it to do, we've got the fitness function, what we want it to do, but we don't have a controller for it yet. We don't have a way for it to do whatever we want it to do, and we don't even have a simulator yet. So we're starting from scratch. Not quite from scratch. We're going to give this robot a little bit of information. We're going to start by telling the robot that it's made up of these 9 parts. You now know why you built this particular quadruped in assignment 10. I've been working with this quadruped for a very long time now. It's made up of part 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and these little gray rectangles that you see down here, these are motors. So that we basically tell the robot the parts that it's made up from. The robot is going to have to evolve a simulator, and it's going to also have to evolve an explanation of itself in the simulator. How are all these parts put together? This physical robot has no camera. It can't see itself. It doesn't know that these 9 parts are put together in this way. For all this robot knows, these 9 parts are attached together in serial, and it's a snake robot, or it's a biped, or it's something else. We're trying to give, in this experiment, we tried to give the robot as little knowledge of self and its environment as possible. We wanted to try and evolve an explanation of self and its environment on its own, because it takes, as you now know, hours and hours and hours to program all of this by hand. Okay, as I mentioned in the Resilient Machines project, we're going to start with real and work backwards to sim. So we start by letting the robot perform random actions. Let me see if I can put this on loop. Okay, if not, I'll just do it manually. Okay, here's a random action the robot chose to perform. Like your quadruped from assignment 10, this robot has 8 motors, and you can see in this case it just happens to rotate motor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 upwards, and 7 and 8 down by a small amount, just by chance. The physical robot had 2 sensors on board. It had 2 vestibular sensors. The first vestibular sensor indicated how much the robot's torso tilts left and right, and the second vestibular sensor reported how much the robot's body tilts forward and back. So 8 motors, 2 sensors. Usually when we talk about neural network controllers for the robot, we talk about sensor values arriving at the neural network, propagating through the neural network, motor values arriving, the robot does something. Sense, think, act. In the Resilient Machines project, we're going to look at the other half of this loop. Act and sense the repercussions of your actions. So this robot, as I mentioned, it's got no camera, but this robot now knows, quote unquote, knows that when it rotates motors 1 through 6 up, and when it rotates motors 7 and 8 down, it feels itself tilt 20 degrees backwards. So that's one data point that it has. I did this and I got this sensory result. So far, so good? Okay. The physical robot is now going to rest, it's going to pause, and it's going to start thinking. What do I mean by thinking? It's going to start evolving simulators. Every half-second animation that you see here is one simulation. You'll notice that some aspects of the simulation are always the same. It's always on flat ground. The friction parameters are always the same. So when I say that we're evolving a simulator, some of the aspects of the simulation are fixed. In the years after this experiment, we also put aspects of the ground under evolutionary control. The robot could evolve simulations with flat ground, rugged terrain, ramps, stairs, other robots, you name it. In this very first attempt, we kept some things constant. You can obviously see what is changing in the simulation, which is in each one of these evolved simulations, the way in which the robot is put together differs. Yeah? Okay. If you watch carefully, you'll notice that towards the end of this video, the green torso is rotating 20 degrees forward. The simulations are evolving to recapitulate what the physical robot experienced. Each one of these simulated robots is running the same controller that the real robot ran. But for most of these simulated robots, when it runs that controller, the torso does not just rotate 20 degrees forward. It rotates differently. And as was pointed out a minute or so ago, those would get low fitness, they would be deleted, and these simulations in which the robot tilts 20 degrees forward stay and produce randomly modified copies. Yeah? So far, so good? At this point in time, at the end of this evolutionary period, the physical robot says, I'm done. I have an accurate simulation of myself. I know how I'm put together because I can run the same controller in reality or simulation and get the same result. Is it done? Obviously not, right? Actually, the real robot does know that it's not done because, and it's a little difficult to see in this video, in this population of evolved controllers, there are evolved simulators. There are many simulators, many different simulated bodies that rotate the torso 20 degrees forward. This robot doesn't, the real robot doesn't know a lot, but it does know that it can't be built like this, and built like this, and built like this. It's only built in one way. So the real robot says, you know what, this was too easy. I found lots of different descriptions of myself that explain what I experienced in reality. So what do you think the real robot does at this point?
Move in a different way.
Move in a different way, right? Remember the exploration part, the curiosity part. So it performs a different action. In this case, it rotates motors 1 and 2 down and most of the other motors up, and the torso tilts 40 degrees to the right. Now the real robot has in hand 2 data points. I did this earlier and I rotated 20 degrees forward. Then I did something else and now I rotated 40 degrees to the right. What do you think the real robot is going to do at this point? We've gone from real to sim, back to real. What do we do at this point? Go back to simulation. And we're going to just continue running the evolutionary algorithm. We start with the same evolved population of simulations that we had before. Okay. But now each simulated body is evaluated twice. Once with the first controller from the real robot, and a second time with the second controller from the real robot. And now the evolutionary challenge is more difficult. Each virtual robot has to explain both physical experiences. Yeah? Okay. I had some pretty poor camera work here. You'll notice that the green torso is tilting 40 degrees to the left. I had the camera in the wrong place. The virtual camera should have been on the other side. So you should be seeing the torso gradually evolving to tilt 40 degrees to the right. Yeah? Okay. What's happening during this short period of evolutionary time? What's happening to the population of evolving simulators?
There are some aspects that are coming more in alignment, like the arms are mostly in the cardinal directions, and it seems like it's getting the arms connected correctly, blue to blue, purple to purple.
Absolutely. So I pulled out this particular stretch of evolutionary time because in this particular run of the experiment, this is when the real robot had its aha moment. Suddenly, the evolutionary process very quickly converged in about the last half second of this video on evolved simulations that could explain both observations well. You'll notice that at some point it gets 3 of the 4 legs correct. And then with a couple more mutations and reproductions, it gets the 4th leg correct. So we started with real. We went from real to sim to real back to sim. We bounced back and forth twice. I've been hiding a little detail here from you. This is actually the 8th bouncing back and forth between sim to real. I'm not going to show you all 8. It just happened that after the real robot had collected 8 experiences from the real world, suddenly this very wide range of evolved simulations that it could explain the original 7, once we added the 8th, there was this very rapid collapse to a very small number of simulations that could explain all 8. Yeah, so we've gone from real to sim and back 8 times. This is the 16th visitation to reality. So same experiment that you've just seen, but I'm skipping over 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. This is the 16th thing the robot tried. And when it goes back to sim for the 16th time, this is what's in the population. What can the real robot conclude at this point? The real robot says, I don't know, I keep getting more and more experiences from the real world, and every time I bring those experiences from the real world back, my quote unquote, my understanding of myself explains them. I can't seem to find, I keep doing a whole bunch of different things, and nothing I do seems to break my understanding of self. And by the way, I only have one understanding of self. Most of the simulations in the population at the time look more or less like this. Okay. I remember when we got this data, I was pretty happy. This looked good, looked like things were working, but I was also pretty nervous because you'll notice that all 4 of the legs are bent. It's not perfect, right? We've seen this many times now. An evolutionary algorithm is not an optimizer, it's a satisficer. It doesn't get things perfectly right. I thought with more and more real-world data, it would clean up these little bends in the legs, but it never did. Why not? If you can't figure it out, it's okay. It took me a little while to figure it out as well.
It doesn't really seem like the bends are like kind of contributing to like what counts as satisfactory to its sense of self. Like it only senses like
tilt.
And that's like not.
Yeah. It's matching the data from the real robot very, very well, and yet the legs are bent. So maybe it's that the bend in the legs don't make much of a difference. They make some. I thought they would eventually, the evolutionary algorithm would clean up these bends and get rid of this last little inaccuracy. It didn't. Why not?
Maybe all of these legs are working together in the right way, and if you were to change one, that would be less fit.
Great observation. It's not any one leg or any one component that has to be accurate. It's the net result of all of their actions that produce that. So it's possible that they're depending on one another, and a mutation that tries to, by chance, happens to unbend one of them, that actually might make the robot's ability to recapitulate its own experiences worse, even though it now has a more accurate representation of itself. Kind of anti-intuitive, right? Another aspect is have a look at the physical robot. There's some batteries on board here. The motors are placed in different locations. The mass distribution of the physical robot is not uniform. After careful analysis after the fact, by bending the legs, the robot is actually approximating better the mass distribution of the physical robot. In this first experiment, we didn't give it the ability to place little mass blocks on the simulated robot to play around with mass distribution. We saw that little trick when we talked about the simulated biped, the passive dynamic walker. Didn't build that in. This was a big surprise to me, is that it used the things that we did allow it to change, where the legs are and how they're put together, to approximate some other aspect of the physical structure, mass distribution. Kind of interesting. Okay. All right, so before we move on to the next phase of this experiment, we've just talked about estimation. The evolutionary algorithm has ended up estimating the structure of the robot. What about exploration? During this bouncing back and forth, the robot performed 16 random actions. I showed you 13 of those 16. If you were running this experiment, how would you tell the robot to explore? What does that mean? The robot in this experiment got to do 16 actions. How does it choose? What's the most obvious thing? What might you try first?
Random.
Random. Random is usually a good thing to do. If you've ever watched a baby or a toddler playing, it looks like they're just going nuts, right? They're doing everything they possibly can. In developmental psychology, this is known as motor babbling. In most young mammals, us included, the young tend to just do a bunch of stuff. They're always wrestling with their brothers and sisters, flailing about. It looks like they're acting at random. They're just trying as much different stuff as they can to figure out, by chance, what their bodies are and aren't capable of. It turns out that random is pretty good. Non-random, the opposite, doing exactly the same thing every time, that's the worst thing you can possibly do, right? Turns out there's something actually you can do that's better than random, and that's what we did in this experiment. This one's a little trickier. I'm going to go back to iteration 8. Remember that at any point in this experiment so far, the physical robot has a population of guesses, ideas about how it thinks it's put together. Some of these guesses are better than others. At this point, the real robot is about to perform a 9th action. The real robot is free to choose what that 9th action should be. It could choose to do what it did in the 8th action, not a good choice. It could flip some coins. It could flip 8 coins to decide what to do with its 8 motors. That's pretty good. There's something it can do that's smarter than that. Turns out that your cerebellum does this, and lucky for you that it does. You can explore your environment by just doing stuff at random and hoping for the best, like that you don't walk off a cliff. Works pretty well, but doing random stuff in the real world in which there are cliffs and predators and sharp objects and poisonous berries, not ideal. There's something you can do that's better. What is it? Thinking about thinking is misleading. You've been doing this for 20, 30 years and you weren't aware of it. You're all here because you didn't fall off a cliff and manipulate sharp objects. Humans are unique in some ways. This is one of them. If you're approaching the edge of a cliff, well, what are you doing? What are you thinking? Assuming you survive. It seems so obvious. It seems like an odd question. Why do you back up? Why? That's the right thing, but what led to it? How did you know to back up?
Because if you take a step forward, you'll fall.
Because if you take a step forward, you'll fall, which you didn't do. You're saying to yourself, often, sometimes it's explicitly, if I keep doing this, this is what will happen. You're performing mental simulation, or what's known as prospection. Retrospection, you're thinking about things you did in the past. Introspection, you're looking inward and thinking about what's going on inside at the moment. Prospection, you're imagining or thinking through what might happen to you in the future. Yeah? And so you back up. Kids will often not back up. They'll go to the edge and they'll put their foot over and they'll kick some pebbles over the edge. They're getting right to the edge to try and understand what's going on there. They're getting some of that raw experience, much to the chagrin of their parents. They're getting that raw experience so that as they get older, they can do more and more of this. Not that different from our robot here. How does this relate to our robot choosing the 9th thing to do?
It kind of seems like it's trying to test the simulator. So it's like, well, I did these things, but if I do something different, maybe this will trick it.
You just said it. Maybe this will trick it, right? So the real robot hasn't done a 9th action yet. There's a whole bunch of things it could do. You could walk to the edge of the cliff. You could go halfway there. You could get on your belly and crawl and look over. There's an infinite number of things you can do. So let's consider that space of actions. Let's consider the space of actions for the quadruped. How do you know among that space of actions for this robot, what's a good 9th action? It's looking for an action in that set of in that large set of things it could do. It takes one of them and it's considering maybe this is the thing I should do next. How does it evaluate whether that's a good thing to do next? Where in this case, good means I'm going to get lots of new information about myself.
She said it, just do something different.
So it can do something different, but then I don't need these models, right? I just kind of flip a coin. I'm at the edge of a cliff. I don't know what's going to happen. I'll jump off or I'll back up. Actually, not great.
Move your body in a way that hasn't been moved before, like the torso itself. Making different angles.
Okay, so good. I think we're on the right track. So remember, the real robot has a whole bunch of guesses about itself. It has a whole bunch of self models. So it could send each prospective action, each action that it's thinking about performing. It could take that prospective action and send it to these self models. And each one of these self models is going to say, well, I think this model, for example, if we take a prospective action and download it onto this model will make a prediction. It'll make a prospection. It'll say, I think that if you do this, I think you will tilt in this way. Okay, so we've got one model. It's made a prediction about what might happen. You're near what you think is a cliff, and you think, if I take 3 more steps forward, some part of your cerebellum says, and you get that weird wobbly feeling, when you're at a height. Your brain is telling you what it thinks will happen for that prospective action. What does the real robot do next? It's got some information. Is that prospective action good or bad? Or does it know yet? You gave a good idea, right? Maybe this particular model will rotate or make a prediction that hasn't been experienced by the real robot yet. None of its 8 experiences did it ever go like this. Yeah? Let's imagine for a moment. Sorry. Let's imagine that the real robot takes that same prospective action and gives it to another self-model that's in the population at the same time. That self-model says, I agree with the other self-model. I also think you're going to rotate like this. The real robot takes that same prospective action, gives it to a third self-model, and that third self-model agrees. It says, I also think you're going to rotate forward and to the left. The real robot has never performed this action before, but imagine that all of the self-models that it currently has, they're all in agreement about what's going to happen if the robot performs that prospective action. Is that a good action or a bad action?
It would be bad.
Why?
Because it wants all the self-models to, maximize the differences between the self-models' predictions.
Bingo. A good prospective action is one that generates a variance in prospection. You want all the self-models to disagree. The reason little kids go to the edge of a cliff and go like this is because one part of their brain is saying, you're gonna fall off the edge of the cliff and mommy and daddy's gonna be really, really, really mad. Or it's not actually a cliff, it's a curb, and if I jump off, I'll be fine. I don't really know, so I'm gonna do something. I'm doing an action, and the reason I'm doing that action is because in my head, there are different guesses about what the result is going to be. We're out of time, so we will leave things there for today. You have a quiz due tonight. You're working on milestone 2. See you next Tuesday.